Hello and welcome back to another Amber Roots devlog. Today I'm really excited to continue laying out the groundwork for the combat system. But before we get into Unity and the code, I thought it would be a good idea to walk you through how exactly I want the combat system to work. I wrote down some notes in my notebook, and some things might change once I actually get into coding and trying things out and seeing what works and doesn't, but I thought it would be a good start. That way I have a solid foundation to work off. So let's take a look at that. Alright, so here's some theory about how the combat system will work. Combat will be broken up into rounds, and each combat round will have two phases, a player phase and an enemy phase. Additionally, each phase will have two sub-phases, a maintenance phase that will happen first, followed by an actions phase. The maintenance phase will be where things like buffs, debuffs, and damage over time is handled. So for example, things like poison damage or burn damage will be handled here at the beginning of the phase. Once all of that is handled, it'll automatically move over to the actions phase. And this is where you'll get to go through your monsters and pick out actions for them to perform. The actions will be carried out immediately, and then you'll be able to go on to your next monster, assuming you've got any left that can still take actions. All of your monsters will be able to perform a single action during your phase, and when all of that's done, we move on to the enemy phase. The enemy phase has the same structure, a maintenance phase and an actions phase. And once all that's done, it goes back to the top and creates a new combat round. Alright, so I'm going to jump in and start working on this. Alright, so after working this morning a bit, here's what I've come up with so far. I can load up my team with a few monsters here, and I've moved the enemy slime to the ranch just so that I don't have to keep bouncing around between scenes constantly to test this. If I go up and bump into them, it loads me into the battle scene, and your monsters that are in your team are loaded into these white boxes. Now there are a few art issues with this right now. Some monsters don't have a sideways idle animation and some do, and the pivot points are a little off, but a lot of these sprite sheets need to be re-imported anyway, so I didn't spend a lot of time cleaning that up right now. Now if I go and try to get a couple more monsters in my team, and I engage the slime in battle again, you can see everybody's here and they show up just as they do in the team screen. So if I exit out of here and I make a couple of changes to the team, like removing a monster and reordering them a bit, that will be reflected in the battle screen. So the next steps for this are to get the combat UI working and to get some monsters showing up on the opposite side of the screen here. So I'm going to get to work on that, and I'll see you in a bit. Alright, so we're back again, and if I go up and bump into the slime, we've got combat transitions working, which took me much longer than I'd like to admit because I was having trouble navigating my own code. So the screen fades to black and then fades out into the combat screen. I've also got some button functionality right now, like the retreat button, which takes me out of combat. Now starting up combat again, I've implemented a way to select all of the different monsters in your team. There is a selector sprite over the monsters right now, which I'm not entirely happy with. And there's also a panel on the right that animates which monster is currently selected. So during your phase, you can select any of your monsters that still have an action to perform. So for example, if I select the flying snake and I want to perform an action, in this case attack, I can select the button, and this readies an action. Now there's no current indicator for that right now, but you can imagine something like maybe changing the mouse cursor to a sword or something along those lines to show that you've selected an action to perform. Once an action is selected, you can select a target, which can be an enemy, the monster itself, or a team member. If I click a target, it performs the action and then selects the next available monster in your party that has an action available. There's no animations for any of this right now, so there's not a lot of indicator as to what actions have been performed. Now the slime and the flying snake have already used up their actions, so I can't select them anymore. But I can still select the lizard, who hasn't gone yet and still has an action to spend. So if I go through and perform actions for the last two remaining monsters, my phase will end, and then the enemy phase will begin. And right now you can't really see anything happening because it's all kind of going through the console. In the future you could imagine there would be animations and numbers flying around and things like that. But right now I just wanted to implement the functionality so that I can see it all working sequentially as it should. So now the enemy phase has ended and a new combat round has begun. So all of my monsters have their action points back and I can go back to select any of them again. Now currently attacks don't do anything. There's no HP loss or anything like that. So that's all stuff that needs to be implemented, but before I get to that, there's some other stuff I need to do. However, I do want to show a little behind the scenes of the code that went into building this turn-based battle system. So this method is called setup phases, and this gets called at the very beginning of battle. And what this does is it takes a list of phases, which is up here, and is a list of enums that I created specifically for this purpose. So there's a player phase and an enemy phase, and I left this as an enum in case I want to be able to expand it later on with something like the maintenance phases in between. So this takes in that list and clears it, and right now it's determining who gets to go first in combat based on random chance. So the player phase gets added first on the list 70% of the time, with the enemy phase added second, and 30% of the time the enemy phase gets added first and the player phase added second. And the order that they are added into the list is the order in which combat takes place. In the future, this order will be determined by other things like stats and speed and that sort of thing, rather than just by random chance, but I wanted to add a functionality for actually building the turn order rather than just choosing one arbitrarily right now. Finally, this just sets the current phase to 0, which makes it start at the beginning of the list. Alright, so once the phases are set up, a new round is initiated, and whenever a new round is initiated, it evaluates the phases. And that's the method we're looking at right now. It goes through the list of phases and checks whether it is the player phase or the enemy phase. The current phase index at the beginning of combat is set to 0 in the setup phases, and is incremented as phases progress. This method also sets the action ready boolean to false, and an action is just something like readying an attack or an item or a special ability, but when a new player phase begins, I want to make sure that there are no actions readied. This goes on to check through your monster team if any of your monsters still have action points that they can spend. And action points are just a currency to perform actions. When you've got no more action points to spend on any of your monsters, this calls the next phase method, which mostly just increments the current phase index and checks whether a new round should be started or not. If it's the enemy phase, the enemy AI turn method is called, and right now this is just super simple. All it does is show some debug messages and starts a coroutine that shows more debug messages with a few waits in between. The reason for that is because I didn't want it to happen in the blink of an eye, and I wanted to be able to see in the console if every enemy was having their turn and being able to select a target appropriately. Also, a coroutine will be useful in the future when I implement enemy animations and things like that for the enemy attacks. Then it will make a lot of sense to have waits in between waiting for animations to end and things like that. A little bit of a sidestep here. I decided to implement a couple of combat icons for the combat UI, mostly because I wanted to see if that would make it feel a little bit better, and personally I have to say I think having a couple of pictured icons instead of buttons with words on them immediately transforms the scene into something that looks more interesting and more like a game. The combat UI still has a long way to go, but working a little bit on it will make working on the combat system a lot more exciting and more interesting to see. So I'm really glad I took the time to make a couple of these icons. Speaking of UI and side steps, I decided to try a couple of different UI designs for the game. Now these are just rough ideas of what the design might look like, but I posted them on a few places like Twitter and Reddit, and some of the feedback I got was really good. The overall consensus is that something really simple like Design 1, which is very close to what I have in the game right now, is not really the most appealing. A lot of people liked Designs 2 and 3, with some citing that 3 felt a little jumbled and messy, but that they liked it. So I decided to give that a little bit more detail and put a little bit more effort into it, and I came up with this. Now it's still very much a work in progress, and this really only represents one part of the UI. Not the entirety of the game's UI will be set up in a journal format, but I wanted to try it out and see how it looked compared to the loose pages from the previous example. And I do think it looks pretty good and pretty neat. So I think for right now I'm going to keep working on this style of UI design. Since a lot of people really liked the second design here, and since I do too, I decided that I might use that one for more general windows that can't be really represented with skeuomorphism like Design 3 and the journal. For example, I'm thinking of implementing Design 2 in the combat UI. All of this is subject to change, of course, but I think now I have some direction as to what kind of style I want to go for with the UI. Alright, so where does that leave us? Well, I decided to organize my thoughts and my plans a little bit better than I have been. I've been trying to keep organized and such, but definitely making videos about it and showing everyone what I've been doing motivates me to keep better track of my thoughts and of the tasks that I've set out. As such, I've decided to create a combat and abilities milestone. And this is going to encompass both the turn-based combat and the abilities and skill trees that I plan on doing. In addition to that, I'm also going to be working on the UI designs and monster designs. So taking a quick look at this, I've been working on the turn-based combat a lot this week, and I've gotten a good chunk of it done. At this point, I'm thinking of taking a little bit of a break from the combat system and working on the abilities and skill trees. The reason being that it'll be a lot easier to fully experiment with the combat system if I've actually got some abilities to use in combat. And it's the abilities themselves that will determine things like stats for the creatures. So determining how much HP they have or how much their attack does, it's all going to be done by the abilities, which are not implemented yet. So I think it makes sense to take a little bit of a pause from the turn-based combat and work on that. I've already set up some tasks here for the abilities and skill trees, and I'll be showing these off in the next video. I'm very excited to dig into the skill trees and abilities of the game. Like I said, I've also been working on the UI and monster designs. This is some of the stuff I already showed, where I've been in the process of thinking about how I can redo the UI to make it more visually appealing and more functional. But I've also been working on monsters. Obviously, that's going to be a really big part of the game, and I don't want to slack off on the monster designs, so I've been trying to come up with some new stuff to show and some new monster ideas. Now, these guys aren't animated yet. That's why they're not in the game, but I'm pretty happy with how the sprites turned out, so the next step will be animating them and importing them into Unity. Alright, so this video is already getting pretty long, but I'm really happy with all the progress we've made with the turn-based combat system. As I mentioned, the next step is skills and abilities, and I'm super excited about that. I've been thinking really hard about how I want that to work, and I'm really excited to share my ideas with everyone. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more devlogs of Amber Roots, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. And thanks so much for watching. Until next time.